Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi welcoming you to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. Thank you so much for joining us this week as Commercial Integrator continues its celebration of the 40 Influencers Under 40 class of 2022. We have another great group of 4 influencers who we think have ideas that are worth sharing, worth celebrating, and worth bringing to you. We're happy to be joined by Chanan Averbuch, who is EVP of the Americas for Primeview Displays, Brittany DiCesare, who is Client Success Manager for Control Concepts, Inc., Tom Hauser, Software Engineer with AVI-SPL, and David Pequeno, Regional Account Manager, Sony Professional. It'll be a great conversation. Thank you for joining us on AV Plus, and I hope you enjoy the podcast.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page. And please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
For this entire series so far, we've started with bios of each of you, where you can talk about the path that you've traveled, the individual path that has brought you to this moment of being honored by your peers for having been an influencer and being one of the most successful people in our industry. Why don't we start with you, Chanan, for Primeview Displays. Why don't you take 2, 3, 4 minutes and share a little bit about how you have risen to the EVP of America's role, and also just how you found your way into the industry and why it still ignites your passion.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me, first and foremost. You know, I look at the fellow honorees, and some of them are phenomenal clients. Some of them are tremendous influencers for my life and mentors in my own life. Each in their own way. So congrats to all of them, and thank you for you and your team, and congratulating them as honorees as well, first and foremost. I think if you look at the AV industry, you know, as a whole, I think what a lot of times people like to pigeonhole themselves, or others like to pigeonhole them into where they are and where they're going. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at your energy within the AV industry, you are limitless. And that's always one of those things that I like to tell people about. You know, everyone loves this idea that everyone is replaceable within any work environment in any company. And I believe that's completely false, completely false. I believe if you live a life where your energy and your intellect and your skill set is needed, it'll never be replaceable within any organization, because you make yourself irreplaceable. And that's something that I learned very much early on in my career, not coming from the AV industry whatsoever. I'm coming from a real estate, finance background, entertainment background. And I remember so clearly on my first day of my first job, doing some boring financial spreadsheets. And I was like, whoa, this is awful. This is awful. And yes, it was for John Malone, Liberty Media, huge conglomerate. And then 6 days in, I get pulled into HR, like, your job is being eliminated. I'm like, 6 days in? Like, don't worry. You have a job for the next 8 months and you have severance for the next 6 months. I'm like, what? This is corporate America. And I realized from there on out, like, you may get spoon-fed things, but ultimately you have to work for everything that you have moving forward. And when I was, you know, first starting in my career at Primeview, I got thrown into it, just like thrown into the AV world. And there was no manual, there was no training, there was no like onboarding process back then. Now, if you don't have onboarding, you can't recruit, right? But back then there was no onboarding, there was no training. There was like, go all in, figure it out. And that was probably the best thing for me personally, is having to learn the ins and outs. I remember my first magazine, my first publication I ever opened up was Commercial Integrator. And I read every page cover to cover on every single magazine when I first starting. Now, thank God I barely have any time, you know, but that's how I learned. I learned who the players were. I learned who my competitors are. I learned who are the guys that are the movers and shakers that are changing the industry. And that's really what you have to do. You throw yourself in. And while it started as a regional sales manager, became business development, which came VP, which came EVP, I just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing the narrative. And I think even back, you know, when I first started working with AV integrators back literally 11 years ago, I remember being in my first meeting with AVI-SPL, they're like, who are you? Like, who are you guys? I'm like, oh, we just landed here from Israel. You know, like, you have to like tell the story and engage. And think since then we've done crazy projects together. I look at everybody in the control industry, like how many key things that change from HD-based T, to taking that HD-based T now to AV over IP, to now with what will be NDI. Like there's so much constant change. So if you want to grow within the industry, you can't stay pigeonholed like people tell you that you should, number one. And you have to push boundaries. Like I always tell this to my closest friends, you have to find a way to turn no's into yeses. And it's not about sales. It's about pushing yourself, turn your own no's into yeses. And the AV industry embraces that. You just have to find enough people out there that love what you do and love doing it with you. And that's how you excel in the AV industry. It's not a secret.
So much interesting perspective there. Thank you, Chanan, for sharing that. And I really want to get into some of those points that you've just articulated in the second half of this conversation about how to drive the next generation of people just as successful as you four, just as successful as the rest of the 40 under 40, to push them beyond the boundaries either others try to impose on them or that they set for themselves. So thank you so much for setting the table for that. Let's move to you next, Brittany, as Client Success Manager with Control Concepts. I know you've been on the AV Plus podcast before. Tell me a little bit about the path that you've traveled into commercial AV, into Control Concepts, and what ignites your passion for commercial AV and for the industry of which we're all part.
Sure. Well, honestly, it's been quite a journey. I didn't realize I was in the industry until I started like full time, but I've been surrounded by AV since I was little, helping out at my house of worship. I decided to go get a vocal performance degree, realized I don't love performing in front of people as much as I thought I did after spending all that money. But I was surrounded by this amazing world that I seemed to just live in half of my time. And then I, through connections, got introduced to AVI-SPL, ended up coming there and helping with their member programs. And through there was able to network and meet so many amazing people in the industry. And I realized, wait, I found my way into something that I didn't realize I was already in. And so through that, I was there for a couple of years and got to build their programs. I helped the chairs of the various councils, the most known being the AVI-SPL Women's Council, AVI-SPL Diversity Council, helped them grow and take them to a global scale. And from there, ended up going to all these trade shows and really getting immersed into the industry. And at ISE 2020 is actually where I met Steve Greenblatt for the first time. Steve Greenblatt is the president and founder of Control Concepts, and got to know a little bit about this independent programmer software development part of the industry. And then joined the Control Concepts team earlier this year in January. And so what I have found is it's about just having genuine connections with people, just networking and really being there to listen, lend an ear, and help provide solutions. That's what the industry is looking for. And I think what we've all seen through the pandemic is this desire for connection. And we all found a way to connect in the only way we could, which was through social media and through amazing video platforms like Zoom and like Teams. And now we're able to come back into these trade shows and say, oh, wait, I know you. I've never met you before, but I know you. And so now we can connect back in person again, and we can have some amazing conversations. And I think, as we continue to build on these connections and networking, you're going to really see yourselves and the industry thrive from that. So.
I completely agree. That focus on connection is so important. And I know, at the most recent Infocom, Steve and you and Emily Hosha were everywhere interacting with all the AV tweeps. And it is such a wonderful thing to take some of those online relationships or phone relationships, email relationships, and see them blossom into real life friendships at these networking events and these kind of trade shows. And I really do think it's kind of the foundation of what makes our industry so special and so singular. So thank you for emphasizing that. Let's turn to you now, Tom. Tom Hauser's software engineer with AVI-SPL. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you've reached where you currently are.
So my journey, I started off, out of college. I was a software engineer. I worked for the company called Red Hat, the large open source Linux distribution company. And as I worked there, I kind of, it grew disillusioned with kind of what my work was doing. And I wanted to, as people have mentioned, I wanted to the code that I write code. That's what I do. And I wanted the code to impact people, not, make some computer somewhere operate 3% faster, do faster high frequency trades, make the banks more money. I wanted to affect people and give people an experience, right? So that's what started my kind of search for an industry that would allow me to do that. And then I saw this AVI-SPL posting and kind of joined the AV industry from that way. So that's kind of my journey into the AV space. And then I guess I would like to just talk about what I was able to do coming from that software background and how it affected what AVI-SPL does. And that is, coming in from this standard software development looking at all those procedures and kind of how development of code is done in that space versus what is done in the AV space. I was able to notice very large amount of areas where improvements can be made. So I guess what I'm responsible for at AVI-SPL is things like, I produce tools that facilitate a modern software kind of standard way of developing code. So instead of, passing zips around or things like that, we now have a centralized code repository that is an authority on what code is being distributed to customers. Providing those tools, providing training to boost that ability of AVI-SPL to become more efficient. Hosting monthly meetings about advanced programming topics like multi-threading, object-oriented concepts, Git knowledge, that's source control, and then debugging knowledge, just, lots of technical stuff that I saw we could improve significantly. And I guess the kind of capstone of all my efforts is now at AVI, when we put new code into the repository, we have an automated system that will build that code, run that code on real hardware, make it assurances that code is functional and is not regressed. And then only then do we distribute it to our field programmers, who then would put that into a job site. So it allows us to have a very high amount of confidence that our code is solid. So that's really where the intersection of my skill set, the software engineering kind of very technical background with the being able to provide awesome experiences to customers at the kind of use level. So yeah, that's my journey.
And the awesome experiences thing, I think, is particularly important. Obviously, an organization like AVI-SPL has a very high level of brand equity, and I would imagine that everything you work on, you feel like you need to meet that level of brand equity or even raise it a notch higher. It's probably a considerable amount of pressure, but it also gives you a new challenge every day to make sure that you can live up to that.
Yes.
So let's now turn, last but certainly not least, to David Pequeno from Sony Professional. Share a little bit about your journey, David, how you ended up with Sony Professional and what brought you to this point where you're being recognized and honored by your peers in the industry for being a successful young professional, a successful influencer.
Yeah. And, I'm just really still trying to take it all in with being honored with the award. I mean, it's awesome, and it's an awesome group of people. At first I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, but took some time to kind of reflect. And I've been in the industry for 7 years, which is a good amount of time, and I didn't realize it, but I started when I was 21, which pretty much my whole adult life, which is awesome. When I started, it's kind of a funny story. I had 2 job interviews. I had a job interview at Sharp NEC and at CDW. And I was always interested in technology, not necessarily interested in sales, but I knew that's kind of the direction I wanted to go into. And I ended up going to NEC. I thought it was kind of cool. I knew nothing about Pro AV, but they sold TVs, they sold projectors. That's kind of cool, right? And what I found going there was, even though I started as a temp and I was doing, a lot of entry level type of work, I got to meet a lot of really cool people. I got to work with a lot of great mentors over that time and a lot of different customers. So what started out as kind of a temp job where it was temporary and I was still kind of figuring out myself, at that young age, turned into a career. I was at NEC for 5 years. I started as a temp, then I moved into sales, and slowly but surely, the team that I started on, it was 2 temps with, 300 accounts that were dormant accounts, not doing a lot of business. And that team eventually became a team of 5 people covering about 40% of Sharp NEC's business. So, and we just really worked hard. And, worked with a lot of different clients. During that time, I got to cover a lot of different territories. I covered Canada for 2.5 years. I covered pretty much accounts in every single state. I got to work with the digital cinema team and, displays and projectors and get into that world. So I had a lot of success there. I made a lot of great friends and memories. When the pandemic happened, I just kind of felt like it was time for me to kind of see where I could go with my career. I felt like in sports terms, like going from my rookie contract, where can I go and bring value? And, unfortunately, it wasn't at NEC. I just didn't feel like that opportunity was there anymore. I went to a startup called Hypervision, who, was kind of breaking into the US AV market. And although that, didn't end up working out for me, I did learn a lot. I kind of got to be in the field for the first time and really take that next step forward. So for me, it was a big moment in my career. That was about 2 years ago. And then a little bit over a year ago, I got the opportunity to come to Sony. It was good timing and really just seemed like a good fit for the role. And, I've been here ever since. I've been very happy. But I've also, continued to grow my career, not only, in the pro AV world, but also the people I've met and the opportunities that I've been given too. So, I didn't talk so much about the things I did in my career, but that's kind of a good snapshot of the last 7 years, which, wow, I still can't believe it's been 7 years already. It's crazy.
And I think it's worth underscoring the people aspect of it. I mean, in the conversations I've had post announcement of the 40 under 40 with people I know in Sony, they're all just so proud and excited that you were named to the list. So that kind of an affirming and supportive environment, I think, is really kind of special.
Yeah, and it's been great. But what gets me up every day in the morning is meeting people like you and everyone else on the call, because the one thing I've learned in this industry is that it's a really good industry. Like, people are very nice, people are very welcoming. It's great to be part of this community, really. So it's awesome.
So now that we've kind of acclimated ourselves, gotten to know everybody on this podcast, I just want to first broach the topic of the 40 under 40 in general. I think some of you may have seen there was a pretty robust discussion on Twitter about whether ideas like the 40 under 40 are good, or whether it's excluding people who are over 40, over 50, et cetera. From your own perspectives, can you share what it means to be a young professional who's being honored? I don't want it to be a self-congratulatory thing about how great the 40 under 40 is, but let me know what it means for someone who is in their 20s, in their 30s, relatively early in their career, to be honored by a media outlet in your industry.
Who takes this first? I don't know. So I'll take a knock at that. So I don't know. I think that, having these types of things is phenomenal, because a lot of times when you're older in the industry, you may get complacent and you may need that little bit of a push from the younger guy saying, yo, look at this guy, he's a mover and shaker, he's getting it done. Or this gal, Brittany, look at her, she's just skyrocketing, it's crazy, right? I think they sometimes need that, the dinosaurs on one side, no offense. On the other side, I think some of the people, that are younger in the industry may lack the confidence, and they may not feel that. And then also they get honored, like, whoa, and that may propel their careers further. So I think either way, you're giving the dinosaurs a nice push, right? And on the other end, you're getting the younger people to be like, whoa, I'm actually doing something. Wow, this AV industry is cool. And it's relevant, right? And I think if you look at, Tom is coming from a different industry, Brittany's also coming to a large extent from a different industry. A lot of these people need that push to be like, wait, AV is cool. AV is relevant. It's like, I get it in my home, you press a few buttons, everything turns on and off, but there's more to that in AV. And the younger people are the ones that, sorry to say it, get it done.
Well, I think too, oftentimes, the younger people in the industry are often the ones, like you said, Chanan, doing the work, but not necessarily being seen. And so I think it's nice, not only for us, but those coming up behind us in future generations, to see that this industry cares about those entering the industry and those who are taking steps to further the industry. And I think as someone who has not always been confident in themselves, it's nice to be able to see that the industry is recognizing the work that's being done. And it's honestly a boost of encouragement to be able to say, I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I just need to continue on my path. And it gives also space for us to speak into the future generations coming in and to say, like, there's room for you here, and there's a way forward, and you're in an industry that recognizes talent regardless of your age, your gender, what you look like. So
I think that idea of there's room for you here and there's a way forward is important. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of, whether they're trade schools, universities, whatever it is, that have like an AV integration studies program or AV related curriculum. A lot of people do kind of start on one career path and they fall into or end up in our industry. As young influencers who have really made a mark in commercial AV, and however many years you've been part of it, do you have any suggestions or any ideas for how to have a more intentional path for people to enter commercial AV?
I could actually speak from the software side. So it's very interesting coming from a software engineering perspective, because a lot of the kind of tools that are used in the AV space would be, they're very interesting. Let's put it that way. They are unique, and they are quite different from a typical software development kind of process. And there are unique challenges that are very, very interesting in that space. And you're speaking of, you use the word, what did you use? You used the word
intentional.
Intentional, exactly. So I think that there could be some value there, but interestingly enough, the industry as a whole, Chanan said, AV over IP is becoming a bigger thing, right? As are more modern tools. So I think that there's actually a big opportunity for the bridge between a traditional software or computer science training degree, say, and the application to the AV space. And that really, I don't think is offered at all, really. Mm-hmm. How do we, you can write C# code, you can write whatever Lua, whatever you need to write, but how does that actually create an experience for the end user? Like in a full kind of holistic senses, I don't believe is at all done.
Yeah, Tom, it's funny. You raise a good point, because I was like working with your team, and we were talking about Microsoft Teams, right? And some of the new capabilities in Front Row. And your team, again, you're very blessed in the sense that within AVI-SPL, they have Microsoft team leaders, right? They have a group of them. And one of them is like, Chanan, if you do this is going to be a game changer. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And we tried to implement that. And within 48 hours, we had like a new product that would tackle that. And then we're like, okay, let's get it ready for InfoComm. And we're like, oh crap, InfoComm's around the corner. We got to get this running. And like, we literally made it just in time, the morning of InfoComm at the show, because we didn't have a lot of resources on the software side or the Microsoft side at the time. And we had to, if we're going to make solutions for Microsoft, we got to go all in on this. And like your team actually in Toronto were like, oh yes, we love the ultra wide stuff. We're all in the teams in the front row. Like, do you have any manuals? I'm like, we're working on it, man. It's happening so fast because, we were great at AV from a company perspective, but like we had to engage with others that have software, expertise like yours in IT, because the industry is shaping up and changing really fast. And this hybrid thing, one big accelerator for that, one big rocket ship for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen that on our side. So Control Concepts, we develop a lot of modules and drivers and plugins for the industry. And so our team has seen such a vast push towards the necessity of this, which is great for us. And I agree with both of you. I think it's so important that the industries start understanding that side a little bit more and start investing in not only creating these solutions, but the overall experience of it. So I love those points. I think another way in helping get younger generations in is really just more visibility and talking about it in the schools. Like I said, I grew up around it and didn't realize what I was doing. I was helping run sound. I was helping with lyric presentation software. I was doing load in and load outs for my church. I just didn't realize that I could actually build a career off of that. And that there was an industry involved in all of this. And so I think the more we talk about it and the more visibility we give to that, and partnering with the associations. I know I worked there, so I'll put my association hat on, but they offer a lot of education and guidance and support. And I think the younger we can get people involved in the associations, get them trained, get them learning, get them CTS certified before they're even out of college, like the better off we are in getting them ingrained into our industry and just skyrocketing from there.
The CTS certification thing is definitely worth mentioning. And I have to also give kind of a shout out to you, Brittany, for that. I know you wrote a piece for us, your first piece, I believe, for any of the trade publications about how you earned your CTS in 3 months. So it's not just talking the talk, it's also walking the walk.
Thank you.
You know, there's Dan, an interesting thing that Brittany alluded to. And it's like, I remember I got asked to speak on something IoT related at the time. This goes back 2 years ago in Infocom. And I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes type of thing. I'm fine. I get invited back to speak about something that I know a little bit more, I would say, about, which is more immersiveness and experiential content, whatever. And because it was in person, right? And it wasn't, like 2 years ago, which was very small, Infocom. And what I saw a room full of hundreds of people that were young and thirsty to learn more. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting to see that most of the questions were not coming from, I want to say it, I have to say it out loud, the 40 and older crowd. They were not. It was the younger people asking more and more questions, which was great. But in the same breath, I'll tell you that, like, I was very blessed. I want to say a few years after I started to have some phenomenal mentors. And unfortunately, actually, I had to mention this. One of them passed away late Thursday night. His name was Doug Berkfeld. Doug Berkfeld from St. Louis. He passed away. And I traveled with this guy, I'm telling you, no exaggeration, tens of thousands of miles all over the country over the last 8 years. And he personally was a big mentor for me and shaping me and talking to me about the industry and how you have to do things right. And I think that when you go back to something that you said originally, Dan, I think it's a two-pronged approach. Number one, it's a grind, hustle, repeat type of mentality for sure. And you got to be thirsty and you got to want to learn more and push yourself and utilize every resource that exists from the Avixas and Infocoms, et cetera. But also, if you think there's someone in the industry that's a mentor for you, latch on them. Don't let them go. Ask him questions. You have to. Otherwise, you have to have that fine balance.
And there are so many brilliant minds in our industry across different specialties, genders, experience roles, and they are, I find, incredibly willing to help. They want to nurture that next generation. They want to cultivate that next generation. When we did our recent piece celebrating Corey Schaefer's career and her retirement, we emphasized so much how many people she had been a seminal influence in their lives. So I think that that's a really important point to emphasize. Well, are there any closing thoughts from any of our honorees about the next generation and making sure that we have another generation 5, 10, 15 years from now that is just as impressive as, the 4 of you and the entire group of 40 that we've honored this year?
I'm 28, right? So that makes me a millennial. Whether that's good or bad, that's to be determined, right? There's a lot of stigmas that come with that. But, one thing I just want to say, one thing that is for certain about millennials and Gen Z, which, we're all still learning, how to adapt to that generation. But, what is in common with them is that, they're hungry, they are motivated, they want to be included, and they're very purpose driven, right? Definitely, I'm very purpose driven myself. And, just keeping that open communication and providing these opportunities like this, like what Avixa does, and, opportunities like this where they can have that voice and have that opportunity. And, you guys touched on it too. It is a really cool industry. We do some really cool stuff, right? We make the magic happen when it comes to stadium, cinema, corporate, there's AV everywhere. When I go to the airport, I see TVs, I see AV. When I'm at home, I'm using AV. And, millennials and Gen Z are very in tune with that technology. They grew up with it. So, there are opportunities out there to reach out to the younger generation. It's just keeping that conversation open for all of us to be included, so that we can have these different groups and different voices to be heard.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I think it's also about getting to know the next generations coming up, not just trying to dictate down, because that's not going to work, but understanding what drives them. Gen Z, I think very similar to the younger millennials, are very, like you said, David, purpose-driven, cause-driven. They want to be a part of something bigger than them. And being able to tap into that and explain how our industry helps in that and helps provide that for them is going to be really important. And honestly, they're the ones. I didn't grow up with technology from a baby, but they did. And I think we have a lot to learn from those younger than us. And so I think it's going to be important to take the time to understand them.
Yeah, and something that I learned, from my own personal studies in Judaics, completely unrelated, that I do every morning, is trying to look up, and say to yourself, how do I organize my time, my day, my value? And I think it has to be somewhat of a two-pronged approach. One is my family life, right? And what I have going on at home, but also at work. And when I look at the work stuff, it's the balance of that work, of how do I go and capture not just more of the marketplace, but how do I go and educate myself more in the marketplace? Where are current trends going? And how do I need to get there? And if you map out that family life and you map out that work life, I think the two can go coexist together as you move forward as an industry. You have to.
Striking that balance is so important. I appreciate everyone's perspective, everyone's knowledge. And I just, on behalf of, it sounds kind of presumptuous to say, but on behalf of the industry, I want to thank everyone on this 40 under 40 list and everyone on this call for the contributions you make, for the leadership you provide, for the inspiration you give to the next generation. I'm thrilled to be able to have conversations with all of you. And in the weeks ahead, I want to include every single one of the 40 under 40 because you all have unique perspectives to share. For now, though, I just want to thank all of our guests this week for joining us. I want to thank Chanan Averbuch, who is EVP of the Americas for Primeview Displays, Brittany DiCesare, Client Success Manager with Control Concepts, Tom Hauser, Software Engineer with AVI-SPL, and David Pequeno, who is Regional Account Manager with Sony Professional. Thank you so much for being on the AV Plus podcast.
Thank you.
My name is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator. Please check back every Friday on commercialintegrator.com for another edition of the AV Plus podcast.